Details continue to emerge about the Asiana Airlines crash, showing a chaotic response by the plane's pilots and first responders. The Bay Bridge flip-flop from a delayed opening to a new proposal that could keep it on schedule. Big developments in higher education. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano nominated to head the UC system. Plus, City College of San Francisco fights for its survival. Mounting pressure in the state prison system. Inmates stage a massive hunger strike, while Governor Brown refuses to release thousands of prisoners to ease overcrowding. And a controversial plan for affordable housing in Marin provokes some communities to pull out of the development. Coming up next.
Good evening, I'm Thuy Vu. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. It has been a busy news week and we have a lot to cover tonight. Joining me are Richard Halstead, Marin Independent Journal reporter, Michael Montgomery, reporter for KQED News and the Center for Investigative Reporting, Nanette Asimov, San Francisco Chronicle education reporter, and Tom Vacar KTVU News consumer editor. Last Saturday's crash of Asiana Flight 214 at SFO is sparking concerns over the cause of the accident and the response, both in the air and on the ground. Now, Tom, you covered this from the very beginning. Just this afternoon, there's been yet another development. We learned a third person has now died from the crash, a girl. What do we know about her?
Not much. She is a minor. She's Chinese national. The family has asked that little or nothing else be said about that, and so far the hospital is honoring that commitment. So we will learn very little other than the tragic loss of that person. We also have learned that a fire truck did in fact hit one of the other Chinese girls that was involved. Whether or not it killed her is still not known. We also know as of 5:05 Friday, the fourth runway, 29 left, is 28 left, is open. So the airport is fully open now with respect to all of its runways, so those delays should stop. We know that the hull of the aircraft has been hauled off to a part of the airport which is very much out of public sight, where the NTSB will continue to look at it. And we also know that the Pilots Association is very unhappy with the NTSB, feeling that they've talked way too much and that have in effect besmirched the pilots, which of course is not the role of the NTSB, but the role of the NTSB is to talk about all the facts they know as soon as they know it.
Well, let's talk about what the NTSB has revealed, a flurry of findings that they revealed this week. What were some of the biggest developments about how the accident happened and how the response was handled?
Well, we know that the airplane was flying too low and too slow. There were three extraordinarily experienced pilots up there. These are people that are well trained. The gentleman that was actually involved in the crash, the pilot in command, had flown 747s extensively. This gentleman had landed at San Francisco before in other types of aircraft, and it just appears as though between the three of them they could not figure out that their airspeed was becoming dangerously slow, and that's how many of these accidents happen. So what will ultimately happen when the NTSB releases its study, probably within a year, will be a finding that there may have been some inattention. There has been no question whatsoever so far about any kind of mechanical failure. With respect to the response, there was an immediate response, but the ambulances were told to hold back because they weren't sure whether this aircraft was going to explode. So you would have simply had more people in the explosion zone. And there was an issue about evacuating the aircraft, and the issue was that the pilot apparently initially told the passengers not to try to disembark the plane until they got some instructions. It is interesting that Sully Sullenberger said that this is not an uncommon thing, is to not evacuate the plane until you really know what the situation is. So they may not have acted wrongly. It's not clear whether or not any fewer people will have died. We know that some people were ejected from the aircraft long distance. They were flight attendants, but it was a miracle that only 2 people were killed in this.
So, Tom, are we going to find out, is this unique to this aircraft or this situation? Are there rules and regulations that should make people be afraid to fly on aircraft like this? Or
no, I don't think anybody should be afraid to fly. I think at the end of the situation, we will find that a series of errors all lined up to cause this awful thing to happen. But clearly, hundreds and thousands of airplanes since then have flown all over the world without incident. So I would not be afraid to fly in any modern aircraft, and I certainly wouldn't even be afraid to fly on Asiana or anything like that. I think that these things are so rare that we learn a lot from them. But should people be afraid of commercial flying? It is one of the most safest endeavors in human history.
Well, much more to come, I'm sure, as they continue to look at the wreckage and see what they can determine from that. Also wanted to talk about something else. Moving on to the latest developments on the Bay Bridge opening. Earlier this week, transportation officials announced the opening would be postponed until December. Then just 2 days later, a review panel made a surprise proposal for a temporary fix, which would enable the span to open on schedule by Labor Day, possibly even sooner. So we're going to go back to you, Tom, for this. What is that fix, and is it truly a viable alternative?
It appears that it could be viable. There are actually 3 devices on the bridge that all have some role in resisting earthquakes. 2 of those allow the road to flex, and the one is a very hard contact point. The very hard contact point is the one that has the compromised bolts, but these 2 other things, if they were stiffened literally by putting shims in where they would normally swing, you would pick up a lot of earthquake resistant strength for a period of time until the permanent repair were done. It is a worthy thing to consider, and today the bridge officials did ask the Federal Highway Safety Administration to come in and take a look.
Tom, I want to jump in and ask you, with the plane crash we had, it seemed like a very fast flow of information, as you mentioned.
Incredibly fast.
Compare that with the situation with the bridge. I can't keep track sometimes of the information that's coming out, sometimes contradictory. What's that about in comparison with what we saw with the flow of information with the crash?
I think it's a very good question. The NTSB has a charge, a legal charge, to get the facts out as quickly as they can get the facts out, even though that may be uncomfortable for some people of the Airline Pilot Association. Caltrans is somewhat of a political creature, and there are, when you get into the area of extreme and high embarrassment, which is where they are, no 2 ways about it, people are trying to protect themselves, and a lot of information doesn't come out, and so the legislature has gotten angry about this, and the committee that oversees this, they've gotten mad about this for one reason. They say, why are we reading all this in the newspaper? Why aren't we hearing this directly from you? That's what the meeting Wednesday was about in front of the locals. The meeting on Monday with the legislature was that, but this wild thing came out of the blue, which I think clearly surprised a lot of people that, well, yeah, we know it's going to be December the 10th, but this engineer stands up and says, I have a plan, I can have this bridge open in 30 days, and I think people were just shocked.
It is amazing, and raises questions about who is running this show, questions that still aren't being answered today. Right. Thank you, Tom. I know you're going to continue to monitor that. Right. City College of San Francisco could lose its accreditation by this time next year. It failed to meet enough of the Accrediting Commission's 14 recommended improvements. Earlier this week, against the wishes of faculty, the Commission stripped the elected Board of Trustees of its authority and appointed a special trustee with unilateral powers. So, Nanette, I want to ask you, what does this latest move mean for City College?
Well, it means that the elected officials who had been in charge for the last year and trying to get the college back on its feet have officially failed, and they have been stripped of their power to do so. And now the State Chancellor's Office for Community Colleges has installed a special trustee. You can think of him as a czar of City College, to make decisions unilaterally, and he's now in charge. They have 1 year to try to do it. And whether they will be able to do it is really unclear. I spoke to Bryce Harris, the state chancellor, yesterday, and he was quite unclear about this.
Well, what does it mean when we hear unilateral powers? Is it the power to hire, to fire?
It is the power to decide how money will be spent, to hire, to fire, for example, there's a commission, a committee at the college trying to pick a permanent chancellor for the campus. They haven't had one in over a year. And this czar, Bob Agrella is his name, is able to say, all right, well, I want you folks on the committee to choose the chancellor, not the ones that the previous board has chosen, because he wants to direct it and make it fast. He says that decisions have been way too slow. And so he's going to go in and say, this is what we need to do. He has to, by next week, give the state a list of all the problems that it has and how he wants to solve them.
Is the credential that these young people that are in that school, not so young people, many of them, is this credential that is still accredited still going to be a good credential, or is this somehow tainted, and are they wasting their time and money?
Well, that's a great question, because everybody involved with this wants to remind people that the credential, whether it's an associate degree or a vocational certificate, are good for the time that the school is open and accredited. And so I went over to the registration line the other day to see, you know, how do students feel? How do you feel about, why are you enrolling in this school? And a lot of them said, well, I am here to withdraw. Some said, I'm here to hurry up and get the credentials as fast as I can during the last year that I can, because they're very worried about this.
And talk a little bit more about the people who will be infected or could be affected by this. I mean, presumably it's going to be disproportionately affecting low-income minority students.
That's right, because that's who mainly goes to City College, as well as older people who come back and want to, you know, get a new career or just take classes there, or people who learn English as a second language. So it's a really, it's very sad, and the people who, the students and faculty are actually opposed to the Accrediting Commission and trying to fight this thing, are, and some of them calling it a racist move. They've decided to attack the accreditors as opposed to digging in and trying to fix the college.
Has this ever happened before in California? A city college lost its accreditation, and what happened in that case?
Yeah, it happened to one public community college called Compton College near LA, and a neighboring community college district, I believe El Camino, absorbed that college because Compton lost its accreditation, it's no longer valid. So now, however, the El Camino Community College District is having accrediting problems as a result of having absorbed Compton. And
well, why is that? Because it was overcrowded and they couldn't handle the load?
It wasn't that it was money problems. It was that the financial issues and the management problems were, primarily now the financial issues, were so great at this college, which is much smaller than City College. And so now they're having problems. But what it says is that it is not a good idea, it's not a good bet for another district to come and try and take over City College, and that won't be happening. That's not a likely outcome, I'm told.
So what happens if City College of San Francisco does lose its accreditation? What happens to the 90,000 students? That's a lot of students.
It's a ton of students. And you know, yesterday I met with Bryce Harris, who is the state chancellor for this, and he had no idea. He said there will not be a college for these students to go to. And he said he's working really hard. The state is working really hard to try to save this school. So that is not what they, you know, hope will happen.
Is there anything in the state budget surplus that could come to the aid of this? Really, I mean, 75,000 students, this is not some insignificant part of the educational system of California. Is there anything in the state budget surplus that could be brought to bear on this, or is this just they're on their own?
It is not a question of how much money, although if they had all the money in the world, it might not be a problem. It's money management. So to give you an example, 125 people at City College have access to the payroll computer. So you can go in, if you're so inclined, and maybe give yourself a raise, or, you know, give somebody else a decrease and stuff. So that's the kind of money managed. That's just a small example. They have like 9 campuses and dozens of smaller instructional sites, and they don't even know how much it costs to run them.
Well, I know that the college has until October 15th, right, to put forward an action plan. Is that right?
Well, not at this point. There's no more action plans available for them. They have to. What they're doing now is trying to get the Accrediting Commission to change its mind. They have time to do that, but they're losing at this point.
don't want to leave you without talking about Jenna Napolitano, the other big education development today. She has been nominated to head the UC system. What's the reaction been? Because she's so far outside of academia.
Well, most people were quite surprised, but there's a certain giddiness, there's a thrill if you talk to everyone, including faculty and politicians, and there's this celebrity factor of hers. But I think if, you know, at every regents meeting, what you hear is the regents saying, all right, we've got to get more money, for example, from the federal government. We've got to tap into more research dollars. We need some connection there. You know, maybe Janet Napolitano knows her way around Washington and can fill in that gap.
Well, she certainly knows how to manage. She was with Homeland Security, and that was a big, sprawling agency to have to manage. Nanette, thank you very much. There are thousands of inmates still on a hunger strike that started Monday. They're protesting conditions and indefinite detention in solitary housing units. In a separate fight, Governor Jerry Brown is defying a court order to release nearly 10,000 prisoners to reduce overcrowding. Michael, let's start with the governor's efforts to get a stay on the court order to relieve overcrowding. What's the likelihood of that succeeding?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, this has been an ongoing battle now for years, since 2009, when a 3-judge panel ordered the state to reduce its population so it could deliver health, medical care to inmates at constitutional standards, meeting constitutional standards. There's been back and forth in the courts over this. It got to a point where the 3-judge panel has now told the state that they have to bring the population down by another 9,000 inmates, or face contempt charges, possible contempt charges. The governor has now appealed, filed a motion to the Supreme Court to get a stay, to get a delay on that. We don't know where it's going to head. I mean, we're kind of into new territory here. Advocates and others on the other side say the state could reduce that population, not by a mass release, but by giving good time credits retroactively to inmates who have earned them through good behavior. So we're at another chapter here. The Supreme Court 2 years ago rejected, basically affirmed the lower court's position and threw it back down. But politically, the governor fighting a fight to protect public safety may not be such a bad position to take. It may not be effective with the courts, but he is facing opposition from the Republicans on the public safety front over his realignment efforts. So the politics of this may not be bad for him, but legally, it's right now hard to imagine the Supreme Court's going to reverse a position they took 2 years ago.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, you know, in all of this, does anybody talk about building more prisons? I mean, if the choice is between letting, is it violent criminals out? And I can't believe the Republicans are arguing for that. That's not their usual position, but why not
Well, no,
build
the
more
politics
prisons?
are that the Republicans are challenging Brown on realignment. And realignment, which has been diverting inmates to county jails, has already pushed the counties hard.
Right.
So it may be that the governor has assessed that he doesn't want to push the counties any harder. Right. Thus, he's fighting this battle. Building new prisons, this was an idea. There was money for it. Financial crisis, budget cuts. They are trying to expand capacity. There's still 9,000 inmates out of state. They're going to stay out of state. There might be some building, but not enough to solve this issue.
Let me ask you this. Does the governor have, now he's not extra constitutional, but he has some extraordinary powers in times of real emergencies. Is he anywhere close to being able to use any of those extraordinary powers he has to keep these people locked up, or is it just politics?
That's a good question. You know, the courts have now overruled. They have said the state can to take these measures without needing approval from lawmakers. So it's the courts that are taking or assuming in a way these extra powers. I don't know whether the governor could have those powers, but he just declared that the prison crisis is over and he's lifting the state of emergency in the prison. So I think his powers are actually weaker on that front than they were.
Speaking of prison crisis, there is another one, a separate one going on in the prison system as well, and that's the inmate hunger strike as a protest against what the inmates are calling inhumane conditions surrounding security housing units, also known as SHUs. You've been investigating these facilities for a year in collaboration with the Center for Investigative Reporting. What did you find?
Well, we had at the beginning of the week 30,000 inmates refusing meals. The numbers are down to about 7,000. That's still a lot of men protesting. And the protest is focused at Pelican Bay. This is this prison up in Crescent City, sometimes called a supermax. Pretty stark conditions. Opponents and have filed a lawsuit saying that it is a violation of the 8th Amendment. The state says that the prison is humane. I think what distinguishes Pelican Bay is not the design. We have supermaxes around the country. It's the length of time that some inmates have been spending in these units with very harsh restrictions. You know, I've been meeting men who were at Pelican Bay in solitary conditions 20 years, 22 years.
What is the rationale?
The rationale, the department says very clearly that men earn their way there by essentially being players in big, dangerous prison gangs. And there's no doubt that some of the men at Pelican Bay, some of the men involved in this hunger strike, are notorious gang leaders and have faced very serious allegations. But what we found in our investigation is lots of men who were low-level players or who weren't even in the gang got swept up and put in these units. And I think that's really fueling the anger and fueling the protests.
So prison officials cast a wide net.
That's the feeling, and I've talked to corrections officials privately and former correction officials, and I think they now recognize that. Now, what the department says is they're changing the policy and allowing some men to earn their way out through good behavior, or they're just transferring men who now they determine pose a low security risk. So the department's saying it's making changes. The protesters and the advocacy groups are saying it's too little, too late.
It's very ironic when you think about it that as angry as they are, they're picking, in effect, suicide to protest. It's a bizarre thing that if they cannot be rehabilitated or if they can't have their way, then they'll just kill themselves.
Well, and we saw 2 years ago there was a hunger strike. It went about 3.5 weeks, and the men called it off based on some conversations they had with the department. I suspect this situation, they're ready to take it further. The one wild card is there's a federal lawsuit pending. There are settlement talks underway with the Department of Corrections. If they were able to settle the federal lawsuit, which includes some of the inmates as plaintiffs, that might get the inmates to call off the strike, but that's a long shot at this point.
Okay, well, I know you'll be on top of that, as you always are. Thank you, Michael. A Bay Area-wide plan to create areas of dense, affordable housing has been facing stiff resistance in Marin County. Some residents have strongly opposed the developments in their communities, even threatening to recall their supervisor. This week, 2 designated communities in Marin were withdrawn from the regional proposal, also known as Plan Bay Area. Richard, explain to us what is Plan Bay Area and why is there so much heated opposition in Marin to this?
Well, in Marin, it's been a long, hot spring and summer already for officials trying to defend Plan Bay Area. Now, this is a plan that's designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout the 9-county Bay Area. But opponents see it as a bid to supersede local control and to impose dense, overly dense housing on the county, in effect to transform suburban Marin County into a more urban environment.
Would these be people who already live in Marin, or is the idea to attract more people to Marin?
One of the reasons there's been so much controversy, I think, is because the plan is so complicated and it's so difficult to explain. But it's very simply, the plan would provide an incentive to counties and cities to zone properties within their jurisdictions to build new housing in the future along traffic corridors and next to mass transit. And the idea there is that that would be a way of reducing driving and thereby reducing greenhouse gases.
And very close to there, you see these signs that say, the SMART train's coming. The SMART train is a kind of a key player in all of this, is it not?
Well, the SMART train's part of this larger strategy to try and develop housing along corridors, along traffic corridors, and it's coming to San Rafael, and San Rafael's already accepted 2 priority development areas. These are areas where they've zoned the city so that more dense housing can be built. But people are up in arms about it, and there's a candidate that'll be running in November for the city council that says that he will withdraw San Rafael from those priority development areas if he's elected.
Richard, I'm sorry, Richard, is this primarily an environmental concern, or is there also some NIMBYism going on here perhaps a tinge of racial discrimination. We don't want low-income people, especially minority low-income people, in our communities. Some people have suggested that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are proponents of the plan, for affordable housing advocates, have made that claim, and it is difficult to get affordable housing developed in Marin, but I think NIMBYism is a problem that you'll find throughout the 9 counties of the Bay Area. Marin has a very long and proud tradition of protecting open space, and I think that plays into it. There are just many, many factors, and it's hard to know exactly, you know, what predominates. I mean, there are claims too that some of this has been whipped up from right-wing groups from outside of Marin. You hear a lot of talk about Agenda 21, and this is something that's been talked about on the conservative talk radio, and it's the idea that there's this grand conspiracy by the United Nations to you know, create a super government, and you know, there are a lot of people even in Marin County who subscribe to this belief.
On the financial side, is there a lot of money at stake that if the development plan goes ahead, or is it financially neutral? Is the debate really about open space and population density?
Yeah, I don't think it's. I think some of the critics of the plan might argue that behind all of this is some you know, plan for people to make a lot of money, but I don't think so. I mean, it's driven by 2 environmental laws, one passed in 2006 and the other in 2008, and the whole idea was to do something about global warming. It's one of the things that Arnold Schwarzenegger I think was proudest of as governor.
So it sounds like both sides have an environmental argument that they're making.
Yes, that's the irony of it. On the one hand, the Plan Bay Area wants to reduce greenhouse gases, and the people on the other side say they're protecting Marin's pristine environment.
And meanwhile, people are still debating and still pretty whipped up. In fact, Monday's Board of Supervisors meeting, it was so raucous that sheriff's deputies had to be called in. Richard, thank you very much. Well, that is all for tonight. I want to thank all of my guests for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Visit kqed.org/thisweek for our show archive, to sign up for the newsletter and podcast, and to share your thoughts about the show and our stories. I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.